Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We are just going to wait for a few other people to join, so please hang tight. We'll give it one more minute and then we'll get started. All right, I see some more people joining. Well, thank you everybody for joining. This is Ty from Makersite. I'll introduce our speakers in a few minutes. Give everybody a join. I'm calling you from sunny San Francisco. We've got the Makersite team joining from Neil from Germany. We've got Corinne joining us from Atlanta. And then we've got Moshmi, who's joining us from Cummins in Indianapolis, where I hope the weather's good. So we just give everybody a few more seconds and then we'll get going. All right. Well, for the interest of time, we'll just get started. So thank you again for everybody for joining. This is our opportunity to really have a conversation together about advancing sustainability in industry. I know in the audience we've got people from various industries, but what we want to do here at Makersite was take this opportunity to have a conversation. On the line with us, we've got Moshmi, who's from Cummins. She's the manager of circular economy and life cycle analysis. Cummins has been a great partner and customer of Makersite for many years. And we wanted to bring her on to talk about their journey around sustainability in their industry, but it's really applicable across industries. Also with us today, we've got Neil, who's our CEO and founder, who's calling us from Germany. So he'll have a conversation with Mushmi as well as we go through it. This is meant to be conversational. We're going to have a lot of time for Q&A. So, please send in your questions through the chat. This is really about Cummins. So just a little bit about Cummins before we start, and I'll hand over to Mushmi. You may know Cummins as a household name, $20 billion in annual revenue, about 73,000 employees worldwide, 9,000 locations to which they operate. You may have seen a Cummins engine power one of your neighborhood school buses, or maybe one of the delivery trucks. You may have seen a Cummins generator power in one of their local hospitals in times of backup need, or a data center to keep remote work working. So Cummins has been a product innovator since its founding in 1919, and it's been a leader in various industry and sustainability groups with over 20 years of reporting on sustainability. So today's session is really being about Mushmi sharing her story, and then we're going to hand it over to Neil with some Q&A, and then we'll welcome your questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mushmi.
Thank you so much, Ty, for that introduction. So good morning, everybody. I'm again here to talk about Cummins' journey with advancing in sustainability. With that, we'll move forward to the next slide. So just to give an introduction, where Cummins lies in this space. So Cummins has established Planet 2050 as our roadmap to 2050. Which means that we have established a set of aspirational targets around the three main topics as shown here: addressing climate change, using natural resources, and participating in our own community where we live in. These are critically defined because we are committed to making people's lives better by providing the power of choice, by innovating creative solutions, maintaining the technology and the needs of the future. And we understand in doing this, we cannot do this by ourselves. and we need to partner with stakeholders, internal, external, and outreach, knowing the number of segments and products that we support. So on the next slide, we talk about, if we can switch to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we talk about a little more about those three aspects that we highlighted. So why is this important to us? Is because to establish our goal for addressing climate change, we had to think about short-term 2030 goals that we would like to achieve. So with which we established science-based targets across two specific goals around facilities and operations and newly sold products, to which we are in alignment with some of our climate scientists working in the space. In addition to that, we are setting our foundational blocks to kind of establish around the need for the natural resources and improve sustainability metrics on the way, which is focused on designing out waste and reuse, remanufacture, and recycle to enable use into a supply chain. So move from the take, make, dispose to a more circular system. Which also means that we have to do better in our own place where we live in for ourselves and for our future, which is why the focus is a holistic view. So with this, why it's important? Because there are different facets of the product for the corporation and the environment where we live in, because it's our responsibility end of the day. We also understand the materials utilization has expanded threefold needs from 1970 to now, and it's going to just advance from now to 2050. So if we don't take steps now, we will not be able to meet the needs of 2050. So with that, we'll approach to the next slide to talk about what's influencing today. So there's certain aspects, or multiple aspects rather, influencing our journey, not just our core values and our mission to help the environment and where we live in and where we work for, but also there's a lot of sustainability requirements that are growing across the community, across the organizations. The disclosures, which are enhancing in climate-related aspects, are asking for a level of assurance, limited and reasonable assurance. This is where we can see that Makersite can help us or digitalize some of the aspects of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, because we're going to see in the next 2 to 5 years requirements coming in Europe, India, and California and other places of the world where we would have to show a journey to assurance, to efficiency, to data collection across Scope 1 and Scope 2. And on the roadmap, there are also plans to expand that to Scope 3, which is very difficult, which brings in the second bucket. There are growing number of regulations around carbon inventory, carbon accounting, carbon footprint, understanding global warming potential. They're all around the same bucket, understanding your product. There are multiple facets going from raw material extraction, manufacturing, to all the way to end of life, treatment, secondary reuse into the product cycle, and so forth. So there are some few examples that we have attached just to show how vast it is, and it's applying to multiple industries. So it's critical that there's going to be a strong need to align, not to digitally, to collect the data and to manage it through transparency, because there's going to be a need for the third bucket that I'm showing of sharing this data across organizations. We know today we hear of EPD, Environment Product Declaration, or product environmental profiles, or some kind of product category rules for certain levels of products. But for products like an engine, they're not necessarily a PCR today that we have to comply to, but then we need a common way of sharing. Hence, emissions data with respect to the product, when we're talking about, will have a significant impact going forward. So another insight that I would like to give another example with respect to the disclosures is on the next slide. That kind of shows the journey that we are on, that ESG is another element that will be reporting and heavily monitored in the industry. And we were typically obligated to voluntary reporting, which has now grown to a certain percentage of mandatory reporting and external reporting. However, what we are projecting on the screen, that Cummins believes that we're going to see a rapid increase in the number of requests of reporting. So we would have a mandatory requests of reporting for our company, which means we have an obligation to our customers, because our customers will also require the same level of burden of information, which means that we would need to have an aspect of digitalization tool into our supply chain, into our data stream today, to be able to manage this massive growing need in the next 2 to 5 years, where we have to show assurance, we have to show how we are collecting the transparency of the data, and have to go to the various audits, because we can already see some of the rules that are conforming are doing some amount of scrutiny around different domains. Hence, I think I would like to go to the next slide to show where we are right now in the journey, because this is critical for us. I think we have coined the term value chain, because we're seeing this pertain to every regulation that in the sustainability space, that this is going to be a fundamental aspect. There's going to be aspects of the purchase goods and services upstream that we will have to collect data for, and downstream aspect as well, to meet those requirements of our customers and regulations. So there's going to be a need to understand the aspects of compliance from our supply chain. The nth tier of the supply chain would have to give this information related to the products, upwards to the upstream channel, for due diligence, for various reportings, for raw materials, minimum contents, and vast related information across the supply chain due diligence aspect, which would then we will be responsible to collect those information with help of Makersite, as an example here, to show how we generate the impacts of product, and then translate the information into the reports that's required. Another founding fact that we also know that there's a strong need, and there is going to be market entry requirements across carbon inventory through regulations such as the battery directive, digitalization product, just like human passport, digital passport is going to become real for certain domains of products. And hence, having the traceability of the product through the supply chain is going to be critical. So before I transfer it over to Neil, just want to highlight what we have learned right now, that even within the worlds of Cummins, there's a strong accountability between a technical function, procurement, and ESG to work together, because we cannot achieve the end goal with just one work stream. So with that, Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mushmi, for framing the rest of the conversation. Actually, there's not much I want to present, right? So we want to spend a lot of time actually asking you some of these questions and having a conversation, as Ty mentioned. And I think the first thing that comes to mind, or is so striking for me, is there's a lot that needs to be done. That's what, this slide in itself is one thing, but I think some of the slides that you shared before around what's the motivation behind it, and I think the ambition is massive. You have not yet. Go back to the previous slide, please. You've embarked on a transformational journey. It's not an improvement journey. I think many companies are, or let's say every company is always in the process of improving themselves. But I see some of the ambition that you've shown here, and I'm pretty sure there's some bits that aren't on your slides even. I would define this as transformational, right? I would describe it as being transformational. I think one of the hardest things is starting this process, and that's the hardest part sometimes. How do you actually say, this is what we need to do? We know there's lots of uncertainty. We know the ambition is big, but we are going to start, and this is how. Do you have any tips for the audience? Because I think a lot of us in the audience today are are facing that same conundrum, right? Either you want to do something, you could do something small and start small and then scale fast, but I think not to lose sight of that big ambition. What would you share with the others?
It's a very important question, and change is difficult. Change is hard, and I was blessed to come into an organization where my leadership had already set out some fundamental pillars, which really helped to start on this journey. Having Planet 2050 strategy established, having goals established around how do you want to measure the fundamentals around the scope 1, 2, and 3 was already established. If I have to start somewhere, we would have to start with the framework. What are the aspects of the framework that we need to pay attention to, and see which are the difficult pieces and the easy pieces. We know from the greenhouse gas protocol was kind of a founding pillar for our journey, and that's where we are on still, and we are trying to leverage science-based targets, as I mentioned, to get to our 2030 goals on two specific goals. So that would be the experience that I have to share. That you start with understanding the pillars, understanding the foundational blocks needed, understanding from the greenhouse gas protocol perspective what makes most sense. Sometimes the product specific is the most tough or the toughest thing to do, collect data upon. So there is an aspect of spend-based model to the hybrid to the product specific. What are the triggers and the levers that we want to establish is the first fundamental discussion that we had while we have been on the journey.
Amazing. There's a large part of this is I like to frame it as, there's purpose, and I think you define purpose very clearly, and then there is people that will fulfill that purpose, and there's these people need processes, and processes need tools to support them. But in this framework, I think one of the most foundational things is what kind of organization do you need, to drive sustainability within such an organization like Cummins? I mean, it's massive, 70,000 people plus. If you could describe, how is sustainability organized within Cummins? What are the, who are the key players and functions that support all of this machinery that you need?
Right, and I think I'm kind of showing a bit of that on this slide. So we have as Cummins, we have a corporate sustainability organization supporting all the various functions within the different business units. And our goal is to have the common voice. We also have established not just defining sustainability, but we also, I would put as a message of Planet 2050, we have an influencer program where anybody in Cummins across different businesses can join the influencer program to be a part of Planet 2050 transformation, and in their domain, in their work, add this objective and work towards the end goal. So we have different aspects established across the organization. But as you mentioned, I think the critical aspects that I'm showing that we have uncovered, that we need a strong connection between our technical functions, which includes engineering, manufacturing, aftermarket services, aspects of supply chain, because procurement plays a very critical role in the space of collecting and gathering the data, the processes needed in that space. And then obviously ESG, because we have a corporate ESG organization looking at the certification journey, the reporting journey, and they would need the data along with our regulatory team. So I would say there's a host of stakeholders that you see on the screen and beyond that help. So we cannot work this in sideloads in a given environment. It has to be a group effort.
Would you describe it as there is a centralized function that provides sustainability expertise, and they affect sustainability in different functions by supporting them as a service? Is that how you guys have done it?
Yes. So the corporate sustainability is the centralized function, under which I'm the part of, and I'm the SME for circular life cycle and circular life cycle planning, as well as for life cycle analysis aspect. And we have different stakeholders within the organization to help flow that message with the processes into the business units who would actually need to go ahead and collect this information for.
Amazing. There's probably many people that require data to guide their decision making, right, as they go forward. Who are the current people who leverage the kind of information that you provide, and who are the people that are still not on the boat, right? Who will come into the future? What I'm trying to get at is how does data, sustainability data, start percolating through an organization like Cummins, right? Because many of us in the sustainability world, we very often think, well, this is data for us. We're calculating this, and we'll create a report out of it, and then we'll present it to managers. But I think there's a different mindset one needs when you arrive at this kind of scale, right? And I'm very curious about how you see this in Cummins and how that could be applicable across other companies as well.
Yeah, well, this data per se, I mean, again, disclaimer, we are in the beginning of the journey. We still have a long way to go, but we are focused to kind of to understand, benchmark where we can make a difference. And for that, the data interpretation is around understanding those right bullets that you see on the right is, what is the carbon inventory? What does that mean for us? What is the product footprint or water usage or energy demand that we're projecting? What does that mean for us? And then aspects about recycled content, this is something that we are seeing as a growing need from the regulation. So there's a flow of stream of information that our customers need, for which we need to prepare for, because the customers need them to meet their also end goals, targets, regulations, so forth. So there is a kind of flow of information through the different intercepts of supply chain and stakeholders that's looking for this data. Primarily, as I mentioned, to close the loop, right? We are trying to use that material again. We want to stop depleting the natural resources. So that's where we are on the journey to see how do we interpret this data through the various aspects. So it could be from different vision aspects. It could be looked as a Makersite, we gives the capability to look at from a cost aspect. It can look at from an environmental impact aspect, or it's about a design and strategy aspect. So, and there are many other facets of it. So, it's very live data, and it's a digital twin of your product. So it's a very powerful data aspect that can be leveraged in multiple different facets.
Thank you very much. Before I move to the next round of questions, I wanted to just remind people, please post your questions into the chat, and Corin from our team will pick them up and ask after this next round. Continuing, I'd like to focus a bit on processes, Mushmi. I think you're a spider in the web within your organization. I'm particularly interested in the design process, right? Because a lot of it is, I think we talk about reporting very often because this is an externality to the company, but it's meant to drive something, right? I believe people behave very differently as soon as if they live in a glass building. Just think about it, right? You behave differently where you would imagine it from one day to the next if your house had no walls or had glass walls. And the same thing happens with reporting, right? It sheds light onto the intricacies of how a company works. And I think at the core of every company is the products that they make and the process they use to make these products. So how does sustainability percolate from the data that shows where you are to driving change within the design and development process?
Yeah. So that's where, the one of the first slides or second slide that I showed are goals. We have those 9 goals as kind of our foundational work, or the pillars that we're kind of doing at this point to define some of the critical foundational elements. Yes, on the 9 goals that we have to the right. So primarily around building blocks into our design processes so that we can talk about how do we reuse, reman, close the loop, design out waste elements in various aspects. We have different projects ongoing in different work streams per se, but we also have a design checklist created for the design engineers as they're modeling to look at sustainability as an input. So that's the first piece that we have established at this point. And on that design piece, we are trying to grow onto it to define the goal number five, how that's going to play a role to collect the information associated to the product. So that's how we are setting our foundational blocks, because like change is hard, as I mentioned, and the processes, we are integrating the ISO standards in the various spaces into our process flows to see how that will be best integrated. We are still in the process of integration, as I mentioned, because we are still in the early phase of the transformation, but we are trying to do pilots across different businesses to make sure that the processes that we are trying to establish would be robust, and we are going to go through the iterations to make sure that we can take care of any of the open loop versus closed loop challenges that we might have there. So that's how we are establishing the work. But as I mentioned, it's a lot of work, and it's a multiple stakeholders across. It impacts tools, it impacts the design process, it impacts the data collection, it impacts the sharing. So it impacts all the different facets, and so it's very challenging but very exciting.
I can imagine. I mean, 70,000 people, that's a massive machine to make them do something different or something differently, right? That's quite awesome. I think if we were to look outside of your organization, right, one of the big drivers, of course, in the context of engines, the use of your engines have the majority of the impact that one would have on the environment. But as you work towards a more efficient portfolio of alternative fuels and better designs of engines, you start realizing that the impact from your supply chains becomes more and more important. And there's different paradigms of working with suppliers in not just collecting data, but also working towards better alternative materials and components and so on. What has your experience been working with suppliers? Whether it's for data collection or anything else, but specifically around data collection, I would say.
Yeah. So currently we are working through the pilots. So we do have our supply chain leadership and procurement leadership who are trying to define the standardized means in these terms, because as you said, there's lots to it. There's materials, there is data associated to the various facets of scope 1, 2, and 3. So we are our leadership from supply chain and procurement are really working through standardizing the work. But what we are trying to do is through the pilots, we are trying to again learn through the supply chain on the data collection what it means. And sometimes that process is hard because each business unit might work differently. So we have to continuously tweak our existing processes to take in action to other anomalies so that we can reduce a barrier, whatever that might be, to collect the data. But it's a journey. I would say it's a journey. You cannot expect that data will be available on request, just because it is hard. It
Yes.
requires it requires even our suppliers to work on collecting the data, either from their tiers or from their plants and again, from their organization.
Yeah.
So if we ourselves take time, we understand that our suppliers would also need that time and the processes. So it's a journey. We talk together, we work together. It's a collaboration. We cannot do this alone and will not be successful by just trying to do this by ourselves. So
I agree
it's
with
a
you. This has been, I've been in this field for what now, 15 years, 16 years specifically, and it is one of the hardest parts. So it takes time, but it's for the companies that have started on this journey, I've seen it's 5 to 6 years that it takes to get a significant portion of their suppliers providing reliable information on a regular basis, and I think this takes time. But it's always good to assess, before after scenarios at regular intervals. Are there any really significant before after scenarios that was game changing after you implemented Makersite and started working with it?
I think our standardization of data within our own boundary is I mean, we have lots of issues to talk about, but one of the prime thing is how do we collect our own data across different work streams is a big aha for us to see how we can do it better or improve it, as he was saying. Because that's something is a fundamental relationship that we need to create for our parts and our products to even get started on this journey. So I think that's the biggest one that I want to highlight.
Nice. Karan, do you want to feed in some questions? Yeah.
Neil, if I may just interject here, I think this
Yeah.
goes to some of the questions that we see here around data. There was some questions around supplier data. There's some questions around accuracy and how do we deal with that. And I think there was a question about just some missing data. I think we anticipated this question around data. So maybe before answering that, Neil, if you could, maybe give your perspectives on just general data collection. I think we had one slide that we could potentially talk to, but can you give us your thoughts about what you've seen across the industry around data and the various types of data, and then maybe address some of the specific questions afterwards, if that's okay.
Sure. I think the right way to put this, right, and I have a slide on the screen, but there was a transition about 15 years ago where companies started thinking not in terms of what are the solutions, what are the software products that they need to buy to be able to solve jobs. Because what you realize is most of the software solutions you need operate on the same data. It is what you buy and what you make and how you do that, right? And so companies and IT organizations within these companies started looking at this in terms of layers. And we took the same kind of view, right? There have been different systems, and there are different systems within companies, and some of them more complicated than others. I mean, we've mentioned ERP there, but I'm pretty sure some of you in the audience don't recognize ERP as a single product. There are some of you who have multiple versions of the ERP sitting in different sub companies and implemented in different ways at different times. And same thing for PLM systems. So we've worked with companies that had 7, 8 different PLM systems. Forget ERP systems, right? And so the idea is that there is data that sits within these systems. They're disparate. They were never designed to talk to each other, even though not for the lack of efforts. It's just very, very hard to do this. What companies typically needed and is this information, I think, is different pieces of the puzzle, right? There's different, if you look at the development cycle, there's tools like CAD and PLM that people within the organization will use to contribute to those processes. When you're in a production cycle, you're looking at ERP and MES and so on. User cycle is your CRM tool. And each of these tools create one or solve one part of the puzzle of how you're doing business. So if you want to change the way you do business, the idea is you need these different pieces of information to come together in smart ways, right? And there was no system that did this in an effective way. We invented data lakes about a decade ago, where we said, let's bring all these tools into one place so we can do nice charts. But the problem with data lakes is it's a reporting solution. It's a solution to the problem of how do we put different things onto a chart together, right? If the data is good, you'll get a good chart. If the data is bad, you don't get a good chart. The thing is, in order to fix, for example, data issues in your PLM system, and there are always issues in the PLM system, whether it's incorrect data, whether it's gaps in this data, you will need information from your ERP system. You might need to fill these gaps through CAD data that you haven't really connected in your PLM system. And I think very often you need to look at data across different dimensions to be able to know what's missing. Right? If I were to tell you, let's say you make 1 million parts, right, that go into your final product, make or buy 1 million parts. How do you know what's missing in the calculations of an environmental footprint, or in the calculations of a should cost, or in a compliance regulation, right? In a compliance check, it's very hard to do that unless you say, hey, maybe I just do a weight check on this. Cross-referencing data across these different systems allows you to identify gaps and create this better quality data. And you need to put this into what we call a data aggregation or analytical layer, right? However you do this, the smarter this layer is, the more use cases you'll be able to drive through it. And I mentioned some of these in terms of lifecycle analysis, should costing, compliance grading, supply chain risk analysis. This is the key problem that I think Mushmi also refers to, right? Which is managing your data and improving it in a rapid way, not incrementally, but as fast as you can. And what we've seen is companies that invest into this cross-referencing information, connecting different data points, don't just result in better use cases, but results in better data as well, right? Mm-hmm. I think there is a question from the audience that thank you for posting it, Ty. It is around. I think this is to you, Mushmi, which is, it says, in your business, and to prepare for the European Digital Product Passport, in particular, you need to do a product carbon footprint. Do you plan on running LCA studies for the thousands of products that you sell? Or do you have another plan?
We're working to the other plan. So we are trying to understand how many footprints we do really need to create, to be honest, because you don't need to create thousands of footprints for all the products. We need to understand the certain fundamental aspects of the product that we are studying primarily, or the footprint is asked for the digital passport aspect. And that involves understanding the plant, understanding the products that are being built in the plant, understanding the supply chain. And if we can, so we are trying to leverage ISO 14040, 44, and some of the established best practices and guidelines to help us navigate on that big challenge, because it's very resource intensive doing this work, and to be able to do this for every product will be challenging given our portfolio. So how do we work with that aspect? And the first piece is also to connect with the external agency, the regulatory body who is going to be certifying the products, to understand what is the actual requirement that we have to work with. So it's to ensure that we understand the scope and the breadth and the coverage that we can provide is what is the first piece that we lay out based upon, again, the ISO standards as a foundational 14040 and 44 as a benchmark.
Cool.
I hope that.
Yes. I think I'd like to continue with some of these questions. And this one is around tooling, which is, what are the most important things you need to solve from a tooling perspective, right? Of this, the work that you're doing, and how is Makersite helping you solve them? And the specific question is around, is there anything tangible already that you can share?
So I think the tooling perspective, this is where we are working together to with Makersite actually to kind of talk about what Neil just spoke about. You just spoke about the PLM, the mass aspect. Let's just take the mass because every attribute has got its challenges, and the mass is one of the most critical attribute. The allocation by mass would be a critical factor from the beginning to the end of the process, whether it be accuracy check, whether it be data collection, either way, from the standard perspective. So I think just gathering the tooling changes with respect to the process maps is what something that we are kind of undergoing right now, the transformational need right now, because as Neil, you pointed out, we have ERP systems collecting the data mass attribute. We have the PLM systems collecting the mass attributes. And yet there are gaps in certain aspects of the data sets, which then we'll have to work with our design engineering to kind of resolve those challenges, right? So it's very iterative. It requires a lot of resources, and honestly, for the kind of the future that we are seeing to support multiple products and lanes, we have to have an automated way of collecting all those metadata together. And this is where we're seeing Makersite is helping us to resolve as part by part aspect, so that we can challenge ourselves to resolve in a given segment of our product, and then develop, evolve, and then take that learning and establish that into the other products we are referencing to. So that's how. So the tooling is kind of we are basically piece spicing it right now, so that we have to first learn to walk before we run.
Awesome. Speaking of walking before you run, I think we have just time enough for one last question, and it's going to be a surprise for me too. It's a dangerous question to end a webinar with, but what were your biggest surprises, good or bad, from the process this far?
The data intensity, the burden of data, I think that was a big surprise. How critical it is, how big that load is for a given product, because we're talking about creating a genset, that is a stationary backup power for data centers, versus an engine, versus a battery system, versus another a component system that might be going into our products. So just the burden of data itself is understanding and realizing how critical it is on our value chain. How do we collect that data? Is the good piece and the bad piece at the same time, because it's a monster.
Thank you very much. It was great having you, Mushmi, and thank you so much for your authenticity and your amazing and transparency in answering some of these very curious questions that have come from I think from my mind, but also from the audience. And thank you for spending the time with us. Thank you all in the audience for listening in. Ty, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks again for participation and your attendance. We'll follow up with any other questions that we were not able to get to today, so apologies for that. But please reach out to the team if you have any follow-up questions. Again, this was meant to be a conversation. This is about moving our various industries forward, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you all. So with that, we'll sign off, and thank you very much, Mushmi, again, for being part of it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, cheers. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.